It's important to show our students that they're not alone out there. They can get together with other people of other faiths and of no faith and solve problems. If we can teach them that through this podcast and they can teach other people that through this podcast, then I think we've done something that's really important.
Welcome to Continuing Studies, a podcast for higher education podcasters to learn and get inspired. I'm Neil McPhedran, founder of Podium Podcast Company and Higher Ed Pods.
And I'm Jennifer Lee, founder of JPod Creations. Podcasting is broadcasting. We want you to know you're not alone. In fact, there are many of you higher ed podcasters out there, and we can all learn from each other.
You're right, Jen. And I know that I think in one of our previous episodes, we brought up PodCon again, being in Cleveland this upcoming July. So we're committed to that. We are going to be opening up the website for early registration in the next week or so. So we'll be putting out a notification about that. And we're already starting to look for keynote speakers and things like that. So if anyone out there is listening, you have ideas, we'd love to hear, and we'll let you know when the website opens up for early registration. We're really excited for year 2, expanding to 2 days, and just a lot of, we're going to build upon all the amazing stuff all the amazing community that we built in year 1 and build upon all that knowledge that we all garnered coming out of it.
And great guests like who we have on the podcast today.
Yes. Just so happened to have one of our friends from the first PodCon, which is amazing. So in this episode, we are chatting with Heather Bigley. She is a senior producer at BYU Radio. BYU Radio is part of the larger BYU broadcasting team. And that's obviously Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. So we had a really cool conversation here with Heather about BYU Radio and how podcasting fits in.
Yeah. And they have fancy studios and we discuss it more, but they really do have resources for faculty or students that are looking to build a podcast. So very exciting. So let's get into it.
Let's do it. Welcome, Heather. Great to have you here on the Continuing Studies podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited and a little nervous and excited.
No need to be nervous.
Where are you broadcasting out today?
So I'm at BYU Radio, which is part of BYU in Provo, Utah, the lovely Provo, Utah. We, in fact, tried to convince Higher Ed PodCon to come here next year and lost. And that's fine.
That because Utah, I've been to Utah. It's actually very beautiful. And there's a lot of great things in Utah.
Yes. I was like, I know it's a 40-minute ride from the airport, but once you're here, there are like canyons every 10 minutes that you can just disappear into and it'll be beautiful, but maybe another time. So Provo, Utah, home to the Cougars and also neighbors to UVU, which was recently in the news, sadly enough. So yeah, they're kind of our local competition, if you will. And yeah, what should I say about BYU Radio? It's an interesting place because I think most colleges have a college radio station and that's aimed at students. And students run it and students learn all kinds of skills. And this has always been we're community radio, but it's run by full-timers who develop shows. We have a ton of students who come in and, for instance, I have 5 students currently on my team and they do all kinds of video editing and audio editing and producing for us. But it's not necessarily that student-led organization that people might be more familiar with at other universities.
Interesting. I just have to say that spending some time digging into BYU Radio, I think it's an amazing resource. We'll absolutely put a link to it in our show notes. I would encourage all higher education podcasters to check it out. I think it's really amazing how you've put together radio and podcasting. So maybe you can explain to us, how does podcasting fit into the BYU Radio entity?
Yeah, so I was hired 3 years ago when they were making a pivot away from radio into podcasting. So they had always had a radio show. In fact, we have 2 radio stations that broadcast stuff out of here. And they decided 3 years ago to pivot to podcasting. We still have the radio stuff, and most of our stuff goes out locally on what we call linear stations to our local audience. But our new idea is, because we are basically from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our core audience originally has been members of the church. And we have so many members of the church who are all over America and even all over the world. It made sense to make content that would be available to them, to the folks living in, I want to say, Michigan. We have folks living in Boston and DC and North Carolina and LA and all over who might want access to our content. So that was the original impetus. And now it's more that we're not actually aimed at that core audience anymore. We're trying to aim at fellow people who are interested in faith-forward content. We're trying not to be specifically quote-unquote Mormon, but more like, you might be interested in interfaith content. Let's invite you into the conversation that we're having and how we're talking about faith and living life here in the United States. Lots of different shows, right? So we've got Top of Mind, which is contemporary issues, and then I also produce In Good Faith, which is an interfaith show. We interview people from all faiths about their relationship with the divine. We have The Lisa Show, which is a lifestyle show for basically Gen Xers. We have Constant Wonder, which is a show about awe in science and history and all kinds of places. And then we have Take a Leap, which I think is what I was sort of invited on here to talk about, which is aimed at a youth audience.
Yes. Before we get into that, I just want to know more about what is your actual role?
So I am a senior producer and originally was hired to work on In Good Faith and just start producing that on a consistent level. Now I am executive producer of Take a Leap. And I also have my own show called Voiceover. We talk to people about the movies that move them because I have a PhD in film.
Right, there you go. So back to Take a Leap. How does Take a Leap fit into BYU Radio then?
So Take a Leap evolved out of the fact that In Good Faith, we were having all of our student producers on mic. Basically, as you create your own intro and outro, we were doing that with our interviews. And because our students were also helping to edit the interviews and produce the interviews, we would bring them in and say, okay, so what in this interview with this Muslim leader was really important to you? What stuck out to you as something that is going to leave an impression? And so they would get on mic and say these short little things. And we had trained all of these students. And then we were like, we should have a student, because we're at a college, we should have a show aimed at young people. The difficulty with Take a Leap is we're trying to decide, do young people actually listen to podcasts, right? That's been our issue. And in fact, some research that one of my students did was she dug deep and saw that young people actually are more likely to listen to shows that are established for adults like Joe Rogan or whatever it is, Smartless or whatever, than they are to listen to shows aimed, quote unquote, them. So that's been a difficulty. But it's a show that my students produce. They pick all the guests. They interview all the guests. They edit everything. They put it through our distribution networks. And I'm really there just to, like, especially when we're training new students, is to go through and edit and say, maybe we should lead with this question instead of that question. So I'm really in a training capacity in a lot of ways. And I also am the person who signs the digital release forms, right? Like, that's my job. I guess in a way, you know, because I'm hiring the students and I'm helping to train them to some degree, I'm shaping the show, but really it is about what are they interested in? Who do they want to interview? And the people they choose are people of faith who are out there motivated by their faith to change the world. That's our hope, is that we're finding people who want to solve problems, and they're solving those problems because they feel, whether they're Baha'i or Hindu or Muslim, like, I feel like this is what I should be doing because of my religious upbringing. So that's what we're trying to do.
And Take a Leap, correct me if I'm wrong, but it differs from a lot of the other podcasts you mentioned in that this one is really more sort of student focused, student led, student produced as well. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So the students, I mean, we kind of said to the students, do you have any ideas for podcasts? And they were like, yeah, we have some ideas. And they went through like a year-long pitch process where, again, I would look over documents and I would make suggestions, but they put the documents together. They pitched to our administration. They created the pilots, So it really was them taking the lead. I have to say, I have to point out, because I know this is different places, but they are paid for that work, right? Like we have hired them to do that thing. Now, BYU has tons of students who do podcasts. We have tons of faculty who do podcasts that are not under the BYU Radio rubric. And sometimes we reach out to them and say, we'd love to have your show on our network, or we'd love to have your show on our linear station. For years, there was this great podcast called The Non-Member Project. And it was a woman who was not Mormon who was doing her undergrad here at BYU. And she was interviewing all the other people who were not Mormon at BYU and saying, let's be friends because it's weird here, right? It's like, there's all kinds of cultural things that we have to get used to. And we came here for a reason, but there's this culture shock we're going through. A great project, but not part of BYU Radio. She was just doing that on her own with resources at BYU on campus, main campus. So a lot of that exists outside of our net, if you will.
I love the fact that you know that, though, because a lot of the times when Neil and I talk to a lot of universities, they actually are shocked how many podcasts that are actually going on. And they said, oh, you brought our attention because Neil has Higher Ed PodCon.
We've actually introduced, Jen and I, through this podcast, have introduced multiple on-campus podcasts to each other who haven't known each other. Like we interviewed 2 different Yale podcasts and they didn't know each other and we introduced them.
That's really crazy. Yeah. Well, I mean, granted, universities are massive and departments tend to silo, right? That happens all the time. Yeah. But at the same time, I think, I remember 10 years ago thinking, oh, this is the way we can get our research out to more people. We have to learn how to present it, maybe to the average layperson, but this is going to be exciting for academia. So I guess we should just be expecting that there are professors everywhere with a microphone.
Yeah, absolutely. So can other podcasters on campus who aren't part of the BYU Radio network, can they access the resources? Like, for example, the studio you're sitting in, and we sort of talked about off the top.
So when we made this pivot 3 years ago, the reason we know who these podcasters are is that we started going to these other podcasters and saying, often these other podcasters had huge audiences that we didn't necessarily have, or some of our shows didn't necessarily have. And we were like, let's see if we can work something out where you could come in here. And we've actually done projects and kind of collaborations where we bring people in and they use our studios or they use some of our students to accomplish things. But I would say for the most part, that's not happening. They are either, with a USB mic in their office, or they've created enough of a presence for themselves that they're getting some kind of funding or support from their departments to do what they're doing. But, that's a tricky thing. I was just listening to your episode about, I forget her name, but the woman who made sure her podcast was her LLC and that could go with her when she changed.
Sarah Holton.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just listening to that and I was like, yeah, I can see why that would be really important. This is mine. It is not yours. And I will be able to travel with it and do with it what I will.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean it wouldn't preclude someone like that from still getting access to some of the on-campus resources.
Yeah.
I just think there's such an opportunity for struggling college radio, which I think we see research and we know that there's a struggle there, to collab more with podcasters and to open up that. Typically, those are amazing spaces. Typically, there's an investment in studios and equipment and walls and all that kind of stuff you have to put in there. So I just feel like it's such a great opportunity that I think we've come across some that are doing a really good job at it. And in others, it sort of seems like it's such a great opportunity. But I would encourage anyone listening to go check out what BYU Radio is doing, because I think it's a great example of what to aim for.
I totally agree. For instance, I taught for a while at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. I know that their radio is primarily like student-led. I was like, what would it mean if they just went to the professors on campus and said, can you get us a 5250 cut of this? Or can you get us a 28-minute cut of this? And we'll play it every week for you. That might be a really great way to bring in the local community to listen to all these professors who are an excellent resource, who are experts in their field. Like, how amazing.
Yeah. Or the academic podcast that's already producing great content about the teams and all that kind of stuff. Like, it just sort of seems like there's such a good opportunity there and whatnot. Heather, you were one of the presenters at the Higher Ed PodCon, and your presentation really leaned into this student-led production. So maybe we can get into that a little bit. Some of the challenges around student-led production and sort of navigating that. How are you set up? I mean, you talked a bit about it already. I think that's pretty unique and your oversight, but maybe you can sort of tell us a little bit more about how you've structured the process.
Yeah. So one of the things that's important is that the student podcast has access to all the resources of the regular shows here. So they have access to like Asana and Slack, and we use Riverside, and they can schedule all the studios. In fact, we just went through this massive renovation of our studios. My students have been in those new studios more than I have been with any of my other shows. I'm always like slightly jealous, like, wow, you guys look amazing. You have great lighting now. So they have access to all of that stuff. And once we've trained them on how to use all of that stuff, for instance, that new studio requires a board operator and a camera operator. They schedule that just like I would schedule that for any of my other shows. So they have access to all of that stuff. And that has been really important. And again, my main thing is to go through and sort of do some training on, let's lead with this, and then we'll put this in. Or, this is interesting, but I think that it might lose just like some basic editing. Like, we're not going to keep everything. We're going to try to keep this under 25 minutes. Making choices like that. So once, I'm constantly there, but I'm also pretty much like, once I feel like people are trained, I'm in a position of, let me know if there's something I can solve. Otherwise, I trust that you're doing the job, and I do occasionally pop in and say, hey, I don't see this file. Like, is this file been uploaded to the distribution network? Like, can you let me know about that? I do some spot checking, but they're doing all of it. And I think that's really important. I think there's one thing, like in our culture, in Mormon culture, we say a lot that our youth are like the best and the brightest, not just like Mormon youth, but like youth today. They're the best and the brightest. They're amazing. They are so important. And I think if we can get out of their way and let them do the things, we'll actually see that happening. We'll actually see that they are the best and the brightest. So
I like that. So more high touch upfront training, but once you feel like they've got their training wheels off, it's really get out of the way and spot check, but let them really, like back to what I was calling it student led, and you called it student led, like truly student led.
Right.
And I just find it really fascinating that they're excited about a studio, because I feel like nowadays with TikTokers and a lot of podcasts, like we're doing a virtual podcast today, that there is so much content, especially from the younger generation, that is generated at home, in your bathroom, in your bedroom. It's a totally different way that they're like, oh, I want to go into a studio, because I feel like they'd be like, oh, that's so old school.
Yeah. When we pitched the show, one of the things the students wanted to make clear was, yes, of course, we're making a podcast, but we are social media forward. So we want to make content that's going to play on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, and that people are going to see it. And maybe they don't come see the podcast. Maybe that's too big of a jump, but they're going to come in contact with us there. And so yes, they are very much like the two students we have right now as hosts. They both have like marketing and advertising background, and they're like, let me at the reels. I am ready to produce. And that I would say that's what they're most actually excited about, is like, we're going to go down on campus, or we're going to go over to UVU, or we're going to go up to Salt Lake, and we're going to do a reel where we do this, So And it's really funny being in meetings with students because I will sometimes say, oh, have you thought about this? You know, based on my own old lady scrolling of my Instagram feed, like, this is really funny. Wouldn't you love to do something like that? And they just kind of nod and they're like, that's a great idea. Long pause. And I'm like, okay.
I think that's sometimes too, when we're doing podcasts, everyone gets stuck on the listen factor, but there's so much more. If you drive an audience to your TikTok or your Instagram or whatever, because you've got great content and it looks like you have a podcast, it doesn't really matter if you're getting like thousands of views on your TikToks versus not many views on your actual podcast. Because again, it depends what you're wanting it. It's a neat way of how they think about it. That's why I'm always like, I'm not great at social media. I really need to just hire someone that's really young that just gets it.
Yeah.
I think that's the way, though, you have to think about it, though, now. Like for me, doing this for years and doing both the social media and then the podcast, I feel like I've had a reframe in the last 6 months of thinking that the podcast is the whole thing. It's not produce a long form piece of content and then spin off a few shorter pieces of content to try to get people back to the long form content. It's thinking about the whole thing. There's going to be a chunk of your audience, as you so well said, Heather, that is going to just consume the reels. And then there's going to be a chunk of the audience that is just going to be consuming the long form. And then there's going to be a hybrid of the two. And I think we got to think about that. Just like we think about the podcast is going to live on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. I've now been thinking about that. And it's on Instagram, and it's on Facebook, and it's on TikTok, and so on and so forth. And I think that's just native to those students. That to me, that was like a aha moment.
Right. Well, and it changes then, of course, what kind of reel we make, because
that's right.
Now, instead of making reels, and I think a lot of people know this now, but this was an aha moment for me. Instead of making a reel, it says, and we'll tell you the cool thing if you go listen to the podcast. They're just like, hey, here's the cool thing. Isn't that cool? Thanks. See you later. And so that kind of thinking about the reel is really like what you'll see on their Instagram and their TikTok. What's interesting about the social media is they have like, we want to do the funny stuff. And so they do the funny stuff. And then we also have like, well, BYU Radio also is invested in, we have what we call like a values scale where we say, yes, we want stuff to be like clean where, it's clean. That's like the bare minimum for us. But then somewhere in the middle of that value scale is we're talking to people about important values that make their lives better. So what is the important value? Is it, I learned that it's important to work with other community members in order to get this project off the ground. And regardless of what our different, whether you're a secular humanist or you're Baha'i or you're Jewish, we're all going to work together and we're going to do this thing. Like that should show up in the reels, right, as well. So the reels, I hope it all comes together and makes sense as a piece. Like, here we are being funny, and this is a funny thing for our hosts, but also here's an important thing that our guest taught us that we're going to take forward from this moment.
Great. What else did you, because you did a whole presentation about this at PodCon, not to put you on the spot, it was months ago you did it, but anything else that was in there that you could share with the audience that they are producing a student-led or thinking about producing a student-led podcast? Because there's some great nuggets that you had shared back in July.
The thing I want to answer that question, but I can't. I think what I can answer is the thing that's stuck in my brain is the stuff I learned from the other people who are doing student podcasting. Okay. So I can't remember her name, but she was at Stanford. And one of the things she talked about was like, my students are coming doing a podcast. How can we interface with all the other students doing podcasts? And how can we build community there and support each other? And maybe that'll lead to networking that gets us more listeners. And maybe it'll just lead to everyone's feeling supported and solving problems together. And that's something that I brought back and was like, we should be reaching out to the student podcasts as a Take a Leap team to sort of understand where they are and what they're doing. And now that I've said that out loud, I'm actually going to have to do it. We had several meetings where I was like, this is a good idea. And then things got lost in the shuffle. But so that to me was really great. And this idea of just making sure everyone's trained and that everyone knows how to do everyone else's job. when you get into the middle of the semester, right, and midterms come up and someone says, I have this Japanese exam and I'm not going to be able to make it today. I need the other people on the team to go, that's great. I will do that thing that you were supposed to do because I have your skills as well. So they all come in with different skills, but we're hoping that over the course of working together, they end up all knowing how to do all the things, whether that's editing in Premiere or whether that's reaching out to guests or whatever it is.
I love
That's
it.
great.
I feel like you answered it all for us.
I think that was Stacy Pena from Stanford from the Knight Hennessy group there. That's a great student-led podcast as well. Any sort of last...
I would say the one question that stuck out to me in your list was like, why is it important to have a youth interfaith podcast? And I would just say religious freedom is really important to us here at BYU. Religious freedom is a scary word for a lot of people. I understand why that is and how that term has been used in the past. But I would say, it's important to show our students that they're not alone out there. They can get together with other people of other faiths and of no faith and solve problems. If we can teach them that through this podcast and they can teach other people that through this podcast, then I think we've done something that's really important for America.
That's wonderful.
Very well put.
This is great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Heather. I think we covered a lot here, and I'm really impressed by what you guys have created at BYU Radio. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that.
And we hope to see you. We know it's not in Utah, but we hope to see you in Cleveland.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I was really flattered that you reached out.
Thank you
was
so much
great.
for coming on.
Well, Jen, another great conversation. I really enjoyed our chat with Heather. They are just doing some really cool stuff at BYU with the BYU Radio. And I really enjoyed digging into how the radio side of it and they're using the studios has really helped to springboard podcasting, but also how when you go to that resource, BYU Radio, yes, there's the quote unquote radio shows, but then podcasting is all a part of it. And it's one big entity of content.
Yeah. And it's a great studio that they have. And of course, they have many different types of podcasts. And I really like that. It gives everybody a chance to say what they want to say or talk about a topic that they want to talk about.
Right. Yeah. It's a voice for the campus, whether it's faculty, students, whatnot. And then how she explained that a voice for the larger community that the BYU campus is in, but then this larger voice for outside, whether it's faith-based or not. But I just really like how they're using podcasting as such a key component to, localize it, but then as well, reach out to the world with all these amazing things that they're doing there and with all their different podcasts.
And she's a great speaker. Of course, she spoke at the Higher Ed PodCon. And so we were lucky to have her back. Well, actually, first time on our podcast. It felt like she was on our podcast because we met her at the conference. That's a wrap. Thank you for tuning in to the Continuing Studies Podcast, a podcast for higher education podcasters. We hope you found the episode informative and inspiring. If you enjoyed the show, we encourage you to follow and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred platform so you never miss an episode. But if you found this episode particularly valuable, please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues who also might be interested in a higher education podcast. We also invite you to join your peers on higheredpods.com, where you connect with other podcasters in higher education and learn from others in the field. Thank you for being part of our community. We look forward to continuing to bring you valuable insights and conversations around higher education podcasts. See you in the next episode.